Okay, girls, we're starting a new chapter now. This is chapter 23 in your books, and this was going to be the topic that you were going to be doing your CBA on. Probably we won't be doing the CBAs this year, but if we are, then we can come back to this topic. But otherwise, we still need to cover it anyway. So this topic is all about the changing experience of women in 20th century Ireland. And your learning outcome there is to explain how the experience of women in Irish society changed during the 20th century. So the important word there in that learning outcome is changed. So we want to look at how Irish women from, say, 1900, more than 100 years ago, up until the 1980s, 1990s, how have their lives changed over that 100 years, and why their lives have changed over that 100 years. So the important word here is change, okay, looking at the differences in Irish society. Okay, so if we just have a look here at a picture, this is a picture taken around the turn of the century, so around the 1900s, okay? So this picture is about 120 years old. So if you just look at this picture now, and I want you to think about Irish women in this picture, how are they portrayed? Okay, think about how a photograph today of a group of women, how would a photograph today look? Okay, in the way that they're dressed, in even the way that they're posing, the way that they're sitting, what they're holding. Okay, so in your own minds, I just want you to think about that now. And here we have another picture. This picture is from the early 1920s. Okay, and again, I want you to think, what changes do you see between this picture and the last picture? How are these women portrayed? And we have another picture as well, taken from the early part of the 20th century. So again, think of this. What are these women doing? How are they dressed? Are they working? Are they making a living? All of those questions. Okay, so on the Google Classroom, I have put a document for you to look at, and it's a little worksheet here. So women in Ireland between 1900 and 1920. So on this little worksheet here, there are 4 photographs, okay? And what I'd like you to do is just answer the questions to go with each of those photographs. You can either type on this document, or it might be easier just to write out in your copy, picture 1, answer the questions, picture 2, answer the questions, and so on. So I'd like you to do that now, please. Okay, so when you have that done, we're going to look at how were women treated 100 years ago? Okay, so they were seen as second-class citizens. So what is the meaning of second-class citizens? Okay, they were seen as being less than men. So they were completely dependent on their husband, who was the breadwinner. So the man went out and earned the money. Okay, they could not vote in general elections. So more than 100 years ago, women were not allowed to vote. They had limited education, okay? So in Ireland in general, education was limited in the early 20th century, but particularly for women. And their expectation was that they were going to marry and have children, and very few women had a chance to do anything different from that. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take down the headings there, or sorry, take down this slide. Okay, so this is women in the early 20th century. If you want to put that as your heading, women in the early 20th century, and you can just take down that little slide. So girls, we're going to focus in today's lesson on the very beginning of the 20th century, okay? So at this time in the 1910s, 1920s, any women who worked mainly worked on the farm. So rural life was the biggest part of Irish society 100 years ago. So this is people living out in the countryside, small farmers. So the role that women had was to work on the farm and also work in the home. So indoor work would include things like cooking, sewing, spinning, and weaving. And we can see in the photograph there's a woman spinning her own wool. So they would make their own clothes and they would make their own blankets and anything that they needed. They would try to make themselves. Many young single women became domestic servants. So anybody that worked outside the home, they would work for another family. So a richer family, maybe a Protestant landlord family who would own a big house with a big estate, and they would have staff. They would have servants, they would have cooks, they would have cleaners. So women who got jobs tended to get jobs in these kind of places, working in another house as a servant. By 1911, 1/3 of working women were servants. So a third of any woman who worked as a servant. So they were still doing domestic work. They were doing housework, but not in their own homes, in the home of somebody else, and they were getting paid for it. And oftentimes they would live in with that family as well. So they would be living in the big house in the servants' quarters. Girls, as the century went on, more women began to work outside the home. So as time went on, women started to get jobs in offices, in the civil service, which is any kind of government office, working maybe for the county council or as a secretary for the guards, or in any kind of an office run by the civil service. Women also began to work as nurses and as teachers. And you can see in the photograph there, that's another domestic service staff. So you can see, no, sorry, apologies, that is not domestic service, that's a nursing staff. So we can see a group of nurses there, and you can see the clothes that they're wearing and everything, very different style to what you might see nurses wearing today. Okay, so guys, we're going to talk now about some of the changes. We're going to watch a little video about women working in factories in 1968. So you will find the link for your video on the Google Classroom. And I also have a little question sheet for you here as well. So on the Google Classroom, you will find a question sheet. You can see that there's two sides to the sheet there, but both sides are the same. So what you can do is just write out the answers to these questions as you're watching the video. Okay, write them out into your copies. And obviously you can pause the video then as you're watching it. It's only a very short video. Take your time, fill out the questions. Okay, you can write those in your copy. And I should say, girls, as we're going along, any notes that you see on this PowerPoint, write them into your copy as well. Keep them all together with the rest of your notes. Another big area then that women began to work in, so we said that they worked as domestic servants. They also worked as nurses. We saw the photograph there. They began to work in factories, and they also began to work as teachers. So as the century went on, more and more women got jobs as teachers. So you can see here on this graph, this is showing the numbers of male and female primary teachers in Ireland from 1930 to 2003. So over 70 years, it's the number of primary school teachers in Ireland. So the green represents the number of women, the purple represents the number of men, and the red line is the overall number of primary teachers. Okay, so you can see that there has been an increase in the number of primary teachers over the century. And you can see the breakdown there in men and women. So guys, I just want you to think to yourselves then, what are the reasons for this? Why is primary teaching seen as a female role? And why are there much fewer men doing primary teaching? Okay. Okay, so girls, that's the end of this this lesson. So this would be kind of one lesson if we were in school. What I'd also like you to do then is in your books, you can read some of this on page 359 and 360. So you can have a little read. So I want you to make sure that you have all the notes written into your copy. I want you to make sure that you've done the little worksheet on the 4 pictures. I want you to check that you've watched the YouTube video about women working in factories and you've answered the questions on it. And make sure then that you have a title on this as well. Okay, so this is Women at Work in the 20th century, or the changes of working women in the 20th century. Okay, thank you.